Your Honor, Morrison had stammered during that first hearing, Mr. Chen has completed anger management courses, maintained steady employment, and has never shown any signs of violence toward the child or anyone else. Commissioner Walsh barely looked up from her paperwork. The court is concerned about Mr. Chen's military background and the potential for volatile behavior. Supervised visitation will continue pending psychological evaluation. That psychological evaluation turned into a witch hunt. Dr. Harold Maxfield, the court-appointed psychologist, seemed more interested in my classified missions than my fitness as a father. He kept pushing about my time with Special Operations Command, asking specific questions about locations and operations that made my blood run cold. I can't discuss those details, Doctor, I'd explained repeatedly. They're classified. But surely you can speak in general terms about traumatic experiences, he'd pressed. The court needs to understand what you've been through. The evaluation sessions grew increasingly uncomfortable. Maxfield would ask about specific dates that corresponded exactly with missions I'd been on, operations so sensitive that their existence was compartmentalized beyond top secret. How did a civilian psychologist in Sacramento know to ask about February 15, 2019, in Helmand Province? Or the raid on compound designation Tango 7 in March of 2020? Meanwhile, my relationship with Emma was suffering. The supervised visits took place in a sterile room at the Family Services Building, with a social worker named Patricia Delgado watching our every interaction. Emma, confused and hurt, would ask why Daddy couldn't take her to the park anymore, or why they couldn't have sleepovers like before. "Mommy says you're sick," she told me during one particularly painful visit, her small hand-tracing patterns on the plastic table between us. "She says you might hurt people because of the bad things you saw in the war." My heart shattered. Rebecca was poisoning our daughter against me, using my service, my sacrifice for this country, as a weapon. But every time I tried to object in court, Commissioner Walsh would shut me down. The breaking point came during the third month of this legal nightmare. Brennan had filed a motion to terminate my parental rights entirely, claiming I was fundamentally unfit due to my military service and alleged mental health issues. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October, and I knew this might be my last chance to fight for my daughter. Jennifer Morrison had warned me that things looked bad. They have Dr. Maxfield's report, and it's not favorable. He's recommending that your visitation be suspended entirely pending extensive therapy. Based on what? I demanded. I've never hurt Emma. I've never even raised my voice around her. He's citing your refusal to discuss your military service as evidence of, quote, concerning psychological compartmentalization and, quote, potential for suppressed violent tendencies. It was a catch-22. If I talked about classified operations, I'd face federal charges and prison time. If I didn't, they'd use my silence to prove I was dangerous. Someone was orchestrating this perfectly, but I couldn't figure out who or why. The night before the hearing, I sat in my small apartment, going through every document, every report, trying to find something that would help my case. That's when I noticed something odd about the timing. The custody battle had started almost immediately after I'd received a call from my former commanding officer, Colonel James Burton. Burton had reached out about a potential job opportunity with a defense contractor, something about my specialized knowledge being valuable to a new project. I'd turned it down, wanting to focus on rebuilding my civilian life and my relationship with Emma. But the call had been specific about certain operations I'd been involved in, operations that Dr. Maxfield had somehow known to ask about. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. Someone wanted me either recruited or silenced, and my daughter was being used as leverage. But who had that kind of reach into both military intelligence and the family court system? I thought about my ex-wife's new husband, Donald Hartwell. Rebecca had always been vague about what he did for work, just saying he was in, quote, corporate consulting and traveled frequently. In the 3 years since their marriage, I'd met him exactly twice, and both times he'd seemed more interested in my military background than in getting to know me as Emma's father. That Thursday morning, I walked into the courthouse knowing it might be the last time I'd have any legal right to see my daughter. The hallway outside Commissioner Walsh's courtroom was packed with the usual mix of desperate parents, overwhelmed lawyers, and social workers carrying thick files full of broken families. Jennifer Morrison looked pale as she approached me. Marcus, there's been a development. Brennan filed additional evidence this morning. I haven't had time to review it all, but it includes what appears to be portions of your military record. That's impossible, I said. My service record is classified. No family court lawyer should have access to those files. I know, but someone does. As we entered the courtroom, I saw Rebecca sitting at the plaintiff's table with Brennan. She wouldn't meet my eyes, which wasn't unusual anymore, but there was something different about her posture. She looked scared, not vindictive. Donald Hartwell sat behind her in the gallery, and for the first time, I really studied his face. There was something familiar about his angular features and the way he carried himself. Commissioner Walsh called the session to order, and Brennan immediately launched into his presentation. Your Honor, the evidence we're presenting today will conclusively demonstrate that Mr. Chen poses a clear and present danger to the minor child and to the community at large. He began reading from what he claimed were excerpts from my service record, detailing operations that were so classified I'd never seen them written down anywhere. How he had access to this information was beyond my understanding, but the accuracy was chilling. According to these military documents, Brennan continued, Mr. Chen was involved in several high-casualty operations, including one incident that resulted in significant civilian casualties due to what the report calls, quote, failure to follow rules of engagement. I shot to my feet. That's not true. That operation was... Mr. Chen, Commissioner Walsh snapped, you will remain seated and silent unless asked to speak. But Brennan wasn't done. Furthermore, these records indicate that Mr. Chen was under investigation by military intelligence for possible security violations when he was discharged. The room spun around me. None of this was true, but the documents he was quoting from contained enough accurate operational details that they had to be coming from legitimate sources. Someone with access to classified files was fabricating evidence against me. Jennifer Morrison was frantically scribbling notes, clearly out of her depth. Your Honor, I object to the introduction of these documents. We haven't had proper time to authenticate them, and I question how opposing counsel obtained classified military records. Objection noted but overruled, Walsh said dismissively. Mr. Brennan, please continue. That's when I saw him. A man in his 60s had quietly entered the courtroom and taken a seat in the back row. He wore a simple gray suit, but everything about his bearing screamed military. More importantly, I recognized him from somewhere, though I couldn't place where. Brennan was building toward his conclusion. Your Honor, given this evidence of Mr. Chen's involvement in questionable military operations and the ongoing questions about his psychological fitness, we request that the court immediately suspend all visitation rights and begin proceedings for termination of parental rights. The words hit me like shrapnel. They were going to take Emma away forever, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The evidence against me was fabricated, but it was also classified at such a high level that I couldn't defend myself without committing treason. Commissioner Walsh was already reaching for her gavel when the man in the gray suit stood up. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Your Honor, he said in a voice that commanded immediate attention, I believe the court may want to hear from Colonel Matthew Garrison before making any final determinations in this matter. The courtroom fell silent as every head turned toward the distinguished man in the gray suit. Commissioner Walsh looked confused and slightly irritated at the interruption, while Thomas Brennan's confident expression faltered for the first time all morning. Excuse me, Walsh said sharply, but this is a closed family court proceeding. Unless you're an officer of this court or directly involved in this case, you need to leave immediately. The man walked calmly down the center aisle, his stride measured and purposeful. Colonel Matthew Garrison, United States Army Intelligence. I have direct involvement in this case, Your Honor, and critical information that affects the court's decision. He reached into his jacket and produced a leather credential case, which he handed to the bailiff. The bailiff examined it carefully before passing it to Commissioner Walsh. Her eyes widened as she studied the identification. Colonel, she said, her tone notably more respectful, what exactly is your interest in this custody matter? Mr. Chen served under my command in several classified operations, Garrison replied, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The documents Mr. Brennan has been citing are not only classified beyond his security clearance, but they've been deliberately altered to present false information. Brennan shot to his feet. Your Honor, I object to this irregular interruption. This man has no standing in a family court proceeding, regardless of his military rank. Actually, Mr. Brennan, Garrison said, turning to face him directly, when someone unlawfully obtains and misrepresents classified documents in a court of law, it becomes a matter of national security. That gives me not only standing but obligation. I watched this exchange in stunned silence. Colonel Garrison was exactly the kind of commanding presence I remembered from my military days, but I still couldn't place where I knew him from. More confusing was how he knew about the fabricated documents, when I'd only just learned about them myself. Commissioner Walsh seemed torn between her authority in the courtroom and the presence of a high-ranking military officer. Colonel Garrison, can you prove these documents have been altered? I can do better than that, Your Honor. I can tell you exactly who altered them and why. Garrison turned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom until it landed on Donald Hartwell. Isn't that right, Agent Hartwell? Or should I say, former Agent Hartwell? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Donald Hartwell, who had been sitting quietly behind Rebecca, slowly stood up. The mild-mannered corporate consultant facade was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. Colonel, Hartwell said, his voice now carrying a subtle accent I'd never noticed before, I think you're confused about who you're dealing with. No confusion here, Garrison replied. Donald Hartwell, formerly Agent David Hendricks of the Defense Intelligence Agency, dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for selling classified information to foreign nationals, currently wanted by federal authorities for espionage. Rebecca gasped and turned to stare at the man she'd married. Donald, what is he talking about? But Hartwell's attention was focused entirely on Garrison now. You have no proof of any of this, and these accusations are... Actually, I have quite a bit of proof. Garrison reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, including recordings of your conversations with Chinese intelligence operatives and bank records showing payments totaling over $2 million. Jennifer Morrison looked completely overwhelmed by this turn of events. Your Honor, I don't understand what's happening here. Neither did I, but pieces were starting to click into place. He's been using Emma, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Hartwell married Rebecca to get close to me. He wanted information about my operations. Garrison nodded grimly. Sergeant Chen was involved in several highly sensitive missions targeting foreign intelligence networks. His knowledge of those operations made him a valuable target for recruitment or elimination. When I wouldn't cooperate, I continued, understanding flooding through me, he decided to destroy my life instead, take away everything I cared about so I'd have nothing left to lose. The custody battle was designed to isolate you, Garrison confirmed. Drive you to desperation, make you vulnerable to recruitment approaches. When you still refused to cooperate, the plan shifted to character assassination and permanent separation from your daughter. Thomas Brennan was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Your Honor, even if these allegations about Mr. Hartwell are true, they don't change the evidence regarding my client's fitness as a parent. Evidence that was fabricated, Garrison said sharply. Mr. Brennan, how exactly did you obtain classified military documents for use in a family court proceeding? Brennan's face went pale. The documents were provided by my client through her husband's corporate contacts. Corporate contacts, Garrison repeated. Mr. Brennan, you've just admitted to knowingly presenting falsified classified documents in a court of law. That's a federal crime. Commissioner Walsh was frantically making notes. Colonel Garrison, are you saying that these documents about Mr. Chen's service record are completely false? Not completely false, which is what made them so dangerous. They contain enough accurate operational details to seem legitimate, but key facts have been altered to paint Sergeant Chen in the worst possible light. The incident Mr. Brennan mentioned about civilian casualties, for instance, actually resulted from Sergeant Chen risking his own life to minimize civilian harm when our intelligence was compromised. I felt a mixture of relief and rage. Relief that someone finally knew the truth, and rage that my daughter had been used as a weapon against me for months. The security violation investigation mentioned in these documents, Garrison continued, was actually an investigation into the leak that compromised that mission. Sergeant Chen wasn't a subject of the investigation. He was a key witness helping us identify the source of the leak. Which was Agent Hartwell, I said, more pieces falling into place. Exactly. Hartwell had been selling operational intelligence for years before we caught him. His discharge was kept quiet to protect ongoing operations, but he disappeared before we could arrest him. Rebecca looked like she was going to be sick. Donald, is this true? Have you been lying to me this whole time? Hartwell's composed mask had completely slipped now. Rebecca, darling, you don't understand the complexities of intelligence work. Sometimes deception is necessary for the greater good. The greater good? She snapped. You destroyed my relationship with Marcus. You made me believe he was dangerous. You used my daughter as part of some spy game. Your daughter was never in any real danger, Hartwell said dismissively. This was about containing a security threat. I'm the security threat? I stood up, every muscle in my body tense. You're the one who sold out American operatives. How many people died because of the intelligence you leaked? Commissioner Walsh banged her gavel. Everyone, please calm down. Colonel Garrison, what exactly are you requesting from this court? First, I'm requesting that all evidence provided by Mr. Brennan be stricken from the record as fraudulent. Second, I'm formally notifying the court that Mr. Hartwell is under federal arrest warrant and should be taken into custody immediately. As if on cue, two men in dark suits entered the courtroom from the rear entrance. Federal agents, by the look of them. Hartwell saw them too, and his demeanor shifted again, becoming calculating. Colonel, I think you're making a mistake. I have information about ongoing operations that your superiors would very much like to keep classified. Information that could be very embarrassing if it became public. Are you threatening to release classified intelligence? Garrison asked calmly. I'm simply pointing out that everyone has secrets they'd prefer to keep buried. Even you, Colonel. For the first time, I saw something flicker across Garrison's face. Not fear exactly, but concern. That's where you're wrong, Agent Hartwell, came a new voice from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned to see another figure entering. A woman in her 50s wearing a Navy uniform with commander's stripes. She walked with the same confident bearing as Garrison, but there was something familiar about her that made my breath catch. Commander Sarah Chen Morrison, she announced, Office of Naval Intelligence. And I believe it's time we told everyone the whole truth about this situation. The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Chen Morrison. My mother had been Sarah Chen before she remarried when I was 12. Before my stepfather, Colonel Robert Morrison, had adopted me and given me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. The woman in the Navy uniform was my mother. I hadn't seen her in person for over 5 years. Not since before my deployment. We'd grown apart after my father's death, and the demands of our respective military careers had made maintaining a relationship difficult. But she was here now, in full dress uniform, which meant this situation was far bigger than even I had realized. Mom? I whispered, but in the silence of the courtroom, everyone heard it. Commander Chen Morrison, my mother, looked at me with a mixture of love and regret. Hello, Marcus. I'm sorry it took a crisis like this for me to visit. Hartwell's face went completely white. Commander, you can't be here. This compromises everything. No, David, my mother said, using his real name. What compromises everything is a rogue agent using my son's family as leverage in an unauthorized operation. The federal agents moved closer to Hartwell, but he wasn't done yet. Commander, if you proceed with this arrest, I'll have no choice but to release information about Operation Nightfall. Information that would destroy several ongoing intelligence operations and put active agents at risk. My mother's expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten slightly. Agent Hendricks, you were discharged from DIA precisely because you thought you could blackmail your way out of consequences. How did that work out for you? This time is different, Hartwell said desperately. This time I have insurance. The mention of insurance sent a chill through the courtroom. Hartwell reached slowly into his jacket pocket, his movements deliberate and careful. The federal agents tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, but he pulled out only a small electronic device about the size of a smartphone. Dead man's switch, he said with a cold smile. If I don't check in every 12 hours, everything I know about Operation Nightfall gets uploaded to WikiLeaks, several major news outlets, and a few foreign intelligence services who would be very interested in the details. My mother's face remained impassive, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. David, you always were too clever for your own good. What exactly do you think you know about Nightfall? I know it wasn't just about gathering intelligence on foreign weapons sales, Hartwell replied. I know American agents were selling weapons to both sides of conflicts to fund black operations that Congress never authorized. I know that several high-ranking officers, including some in this room, participated in activities that would be considered war crimes under international law. Quote, Colonel Garrison stepped forward. Agent Hendricks, you're describing your own criminal activities. The weapons sales you're referring to were part of a sting operation to identify the network you were running. Prove it, Hartwell challenged. Show me the authorization paperwork. Show me the congressional oversight documentation. You can't, because it doesn't exist. Commissioner Walsh had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. I don't understand what any of this has to do with the custody case before my court. Everything, my mother said, finally looking directly at me. Marcus, 3 years ago, you stumbled onto David's weapons trafficking network during your mission in Kandahar. You didn't know it at the time, but the intelligence you gathered led directly to his exposure. The memories came flooding back. The mission that had earned me my final commendation had involved tracking weapons shipments that were supposed to be going to Afghan forces, but kept ending up in Taliban hands. I'd provided detailed reports on serial numbers, shipping routes, and personnel involved. You were never the target, Garrison added. You were the witness who could destroy his entire operation. When David realized you could identify him and his associates, he started planning his revenge. Revenge that involved marrying my ex-wife, I said, understanding dawning. How long have you been planning this? Hartwell's smile was predatory. Longer than you might think. I've been monitoring your family for 2 years, learning your weaknesses, your patterns. Rebecca was surprisingly easy to manipulate once I presented myself as a successful businessman who could provide stability for her and Emma. Rebecca had been silent throughout most of this exchange, but now she exploded. You sick bastard! You used my daughter! You made me believe Marcus was dangerous when you were the real threat. Your daughter was never in any real danger, Hartwell said dismissively. She was simply leverage. Leverage for what? Jennifer Morrison asked, speaking up for the first time since the revelations began. To force Marcus to discredit his own testimony, my mother explained. If he recanted his statements about the weapons trafficking, or if he could be painted as an unreliable witness due to mental health issues, David's associates could claim the evidence was tainted. And if that didn't work, Garrison continued, the plan was to recruit him. Desperate people with valuable skills and security clearances make ideal assets. Thomas Brennan looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of any of this. The documents provided to me seemed legitimate. Mr. Brennan, one of the federal agents said, you'll need to come with us for questioning. Knowingly presenting falsified classified documents in court is a federal offense, regardless of your stated ignorance. Wait, Brennan protested. I was acting in good faith on behalf of my client. Your client, who was being manipulated by a foreign intelligence asset, the agent replied. We'll sort out your level of culpability later. Hartwell was still holding the dead man's switch, his eyes darting between the various law enforcement personnel in the room. Nobody moves until I walk out of here. I have enough information to destroy careers and expose operations that are still active. David, my mother said calmly, you're forgetting something important. What's that, Commander? Operation Nightfall ended 18 months ago. Every asset has been extracted. Every operation concluded. The only thing your information would expose is your own criminal network. For the first time, Hartwell's confidence seemed to waver. That's impossible. I have current intelligence on active operations. You have outdated intelligence that we've been feeding you through controlled channels, Garrison said. We've known about your dead man's switch for months. Every piece of information you think you have is either obsolete or deliberately falsified. You're bluffing, Hartwell said, but his voice lacked conviction. My mother pulled out her own phone and showed him the screen. David, meet Agent Patricia Delgado. The social worker, who had been supervising my visits with Emma, looked up from where she'd been taking notes throughout the proceedings. Hello, David. Sorry for the deception, but we needed to maintain surveillance on both you and Marcus to ensure Emma's safety. My mouth fell open. You're not really a social worker? Naval intelligence, she confirmed. We've been monitoring this situation from the beginning, waiting for David to reveal the full extent of his network. Hartwell's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, anger, and finally resignation. How long have you known? Quote, we suspected you were alive and active about 6 months after your supposed death in that car accident in Prague, my mother said. When you surfaced using the Hartwell identity and started courting Rebecca, we knew you were planning something involving Marcus. The psychological evaluation, I said, another piece clicking into place. Dr. Maxfield was asking questions designed to draw out information about classified operations. Dr. Maxfield was also one of ours, Garrison confirmed. We needed to understand what David was trying to extract from you and how much he already knew. The federal agents had moved closer to Hartwell during this exchange. He noticed and raised the dead man's switch higher. I'm still holding this device. One wrong move and nothing happens, Agent Delgado said. The device you're holding is a decoy we switched out 2 weeks ago when you visited your storage unit in Stockton. Hartwell looked down at the device in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. His face went completely pale. The real dead man's switch was disabled by our technical team, my mother added, along with the backups you thought were so cleverly hidden. You've been monitoring us for months, Rebecca said, her voice hollow. All those times I thought I was protecting Emma from Marcus. You were actually protecting her from him. She pointed at Hartwell with disgust. Mrs. Hartwell, Agent Delgado said gently, you and Emma were never in immediate physical danger, but David was using you both as psychological weapons against Marcus. We had to let the situation play out to gather evidence against his entire network. Commissioner Walsh finally found her voice again. So the documents presented to this court were falsified as part of some elaborate intelligence operation? The documents were falsified by a rogue agent to destroy an honest soldier's life, Garrison corrected. We were trying to prevent that destruction while gathering evidence of David's crimes. What about my daughter? I asked, the most important question finally surfacing. What happens to Emma now? Now, my mother said, her voice softening as she looked at me, you get your life back. The custody restrictions were based on fabricated evidence. Commissioner Walsh, I assume you'll be vacating those orders? Walsh nodded slowly. Given these revelations, yes. All previous orders regarding supervised visitation are hereby vacated pending a complete review of this case. Quote, the federal agents moved in on Hartwell, who had finally dropped the useless device. David Hendricks, you're under arrest for espionage, fraud, identity theft, and a dozen other federal charges. As they cuffed him, he looked back at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Chen. There are others in the network who know about you. Actually, it is over, my mother said. The last of your associates was arrested in Berlin this morning. Your network is finished. Rebecca was crying now, the full weight of what had happened finally hitting her. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I thought I was protecting Emma. I thought you were dangerous because of what you'd seen in the war. You were protecting her, I said, meaning it. You couldn't have known what he really was. Jennifer Morrison looked shell-shocked. So what happens now? Do I still have a client? You have a client who needs help navigating the return to normal custody arrangements, I said, and probably some therapy to process all of this. As Hartwell was led away, he called back one last time. Ask your mother about the Kabul extraction, Marcus. Ask her what really happened to Colonel Morrison. The mention of my stepfather, my mother's late husband, who had died in Afghanistan 5 years earlier, made my mother stiffen. But before I could ask what Hartwell meant, the federal agents had pushed him out of the courtroom. Mom, I said quietly, what was he talking about? She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Marcus, there are some things about your stepfather's death that we've never discussed. Things that David learned during his time with the DIA. What kind of things? The kind that explain why this case was so important to us, Colonel Garrison interjected, and why your safety has been our top priority for longer than you realize. Commissioner Walsh stood up. I think this court has heard enough revelations for one day. I'm ordering a complete review of this case and dismissing all current custody restrictions. Mr. Chen, you're free to resume normal visitation with your daughter immediately. As people began filing out of the courtroom, my mother approached me. Marcus, we need to talk. There are things about your family history that you deserve to know. More secrets? I asked wearily. No more secrets, she promised, but some truths are going to be harder to hear than others. Quote. 2 hours later, I sat across from my mother in a secure briefing room at the Sacramento FBI field office. The sterile environment, with its bulletproof windows and electronic jamming equipment, was a stark contrast to the family court chaos we'd just left behind. Colonel Garrison had remained behind to coordinate with local law enforcement, leaving us alone for the first time in years. Before you say anything, I started, I need to know if Emma is really safe now. Not intelligence safe, not strategically safe, actually safe. She's safe, my mother said without hesitation. David's network has been completely dismantled. The last cell was neutralized in Berlin 6 hours ago. Your daughter can go back to being a normal 8-year-old girl. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders, but Hartwell's parting words about Colonel Morrison still echoed in my mind. Mom, what did he mean about the Kabul extraction? About Dad? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the metal table. When she finally looked up, her eyes held a pain I'd never seen before. Marcus, your stepfather didn't die in a routine convoy attack like we told you. The words hit me like a physical blow. Colonel Robert Morrison had been more than a stepfather to me. He'd been the man who taught me discipline, honor, and what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. His death had devastated our family and influenced my decision to join the Marines. What really happened? I asked, dreading the answer. Robert was killed during a black operation to extract a high-value intelligence asset from Kabul. The asset was David Hendricks. The room felt like it was spinning. You're telling me that Dad died saving the man who just tried to destroy my life? Not saving him, she corrected. Arresting him. Robert had discovered that David was selling weapons to insurgent groups. He was part of a joint task force sent to bring David back for court-martial. But the mission went wrong. David had been tipped off by someone in the intelligence community. When Robert's team arrived at the extraction point, they walked into an ambush. David had made a deal with Taliban fighters, his freedom in exchange for information about American operations. I stood up abruptly, pacing to the small window that looked out onto the Sacramento skyline. So Dad died because of David's betrayal, and then David spent the next 5 years planning revenge against me for exposing his network? It's more complicated than that, my mother said softly. David didn't know you were Robert's stepson when he first targeted you. That connection was something we discovered during our investigation. When did he find out? About 6 months ago, when he was doing deep background research on your family to plan his approach to Rebecca. That's when this became personal for him. The implications were staggering. He married my ex-wife knowing that I was the son of the man who died trying to arrest him. David is a sociopath, Marcus. The psychological profiles we've developed show he takes pleasure in elaborate schemes of revenge. Destroying your relationship with Emma while you were helpless to stop it was the kind of twisted justice he craved. I turned back to face her. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Why let me go through months of hell in family court? Because we needed David to believe his plan was working, she said, and I could hear the guilt in her voice. If we'd intervened too early, he would have disappeared again, and we'd have lost our chance to capture his entire network. So you used me as bait. Yes, she admitted, and I'll regret that decision for the rest of my life. But Marcus, David's network was responsible for the deaths of 47 American service members and dozens of civilians. We couldn't let him escape justice again. The anger I felt was overwhelming, but it was mixed with understanding. In the military, you made hard choices for the greater good. Sometimes those choices meant sacrificing individuals to save many others. How long have you known I was being targeted? We first became aware that someone was asking questions about your service record about 8 months ago. When we traced the inquiries back to David's new identity, we realized what he was planning. And you decided to let it happen. We decided to monitor the situation and intervene if you or Emma were in real danger. Agent Delgado wasn't just watching David. She was there to protect Emma if things went wrong. What about Rebecca? Was she just collateral damage in your operation? My mother's expression darkened. Rebecca's situation was unfortunate, but David would have destroyed her life regardless of our involvement. At least this way, we were able to limit the damage and ensure Emma's safety. Quote, a knock on the door interrupted our conversation. Colonel Garrison entered, carrying a thick file folder and what looked like a metal case. Sorry to interrupt, but there are some things Marcus needs to see, he said, setting the items on the table. What is this? I asked. Your stepfather's classified commendation file, Garrison replied, and something that should have been presented to you years ago. He opened the metal case to reveal a silver star, its ribbon crisp and unworn. Colonel Morrison was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism during the mission that cost him his life. The citation has been classified until now because it would have revealed details about David's activities. I stared at the metal, emotions churning. Why show me this now? Because you have a right to know what your father died for, my mother said. And because David's capture means we can finally tell the true story of that mission. Garrison opened the file folder. The operation was called Broken Arrow. Intelligence had located David at a safe house in Kabul, where he was negotiating the sale of advanced weapons systems to Taliban commanders. Your stepfather volunteered to lead the extraction team. Even though he knew it was dangerous? Especially because he knew it was dangerous. Robert had lost men under his command to David's weapons sales. This was personal for him, too. My mother took over the story. The team managed to reach the safe house, but David had prepared an escape route through underground tunnels. When Robert's men breached the building, they found it rigged with explosives. Dad could have retreated, I said, understanding where this was going. He could have, Garrison confirmed, but David was still in the building, along with 2 Taliban commanders who had information about planned attacks on American bases. Robert made the decision to press forward. The explosion killed him instantly, my mother continued, her voice barely above a whisper. But his sacrifice allowed the rest of the team to capture the Taliban commanders and recover critical intelligence about upcoming operations. What happened to David? He escaped through the tunnels, Garrison said, but the intelligence Robert's team gathered saved hundreds of American lives over the following months. Your stepfather's death wasn't in vain. I picked up the Silver Star, feeling its weight. David knew all of this when he targeted me. Quote, he knew, my mother confirmed. That's what made his revenge so calculated. He wanted to destroy the family of the man who'd tried to capture him. But he failed, Garrison added, and now he'll spend the rest of his life in federal prison. The weapons trafficking charges alone carry a life sentence. What about his associates, the people who helped him? All in custody, my mother said. The network included 12 individuals across 4 countries. It took us 5 years to identify them all, but David's capture was the key to rolling up the entire operation. I set the metal down carefully. I still don't understand why you couldn't trust me with this information. I'm not a civilian. I understand operational security. Because we needed your reactions to be genuine, Garrison explained. David was watching your every move, analyzing your behavior. If you'd known you were part of an intelligence operation, you might have acted differently. He's right, my mother added. David is extremely skilled at reading people. Any hint that you knew more than you were letting on could have blown the entire operation. So instead, you let me think I was losing my mind. Let me believe that the system was rigged against me for no reason. Yes, she said simply, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I studied her face, seeing the genuine remorse there. But you'd do it again, wouldn't you, if it meant stopping someone like David? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, the cost to our family, to you and Emma, I'm not sure any mission is worth that. Dad would have done it, I said finally. He would have made the same choice you did. How can you be sure? Because he raised me to understand that sometimes you have to sacrifice personal happiness for the greater good. It's one of the first lessons he taught me. Garrison cleared his throat. There's one more thing you should know. David's capture and the dismantling of his network have been classified at the highest levels. Officially, he was arrested for identity theft and custody interference. The espionage charges will be handled in a closed military tribunal. What does that mean for me? It means your role in this operation is classified, my mother explained. You can't discuss the details with anyone, including Rebecca. What am I supposed to tell her? She deserves to know why her life was turned upside down. Quote, you can tell her that David was a criminal who targeted your family for financial gain, Garrison said. The intelligence aspects have to remain classified. I thought about Rebecca, about the guilt and confusion she was probably feeling. She's going to blame herself for trusting him. That's not your responsibility to fix, my mother said gently. Your responsibility is to rebuild your relationship with Emma and move forward with your life. Speaking of Emma, I said, when do I get to see her? Rebecca is bringing her to the FBI office in an hour, Garrison replied. We've arranged for a family counselor to help explain what happened in age-appropriate terms. For the first time in months, I felt something approaching hope. And then what? Do we just go back to normal? There is no normal after something like this, my mother said. But you'll build something new, something better. I picked up the silver star again, thinking about the man who'd earned it, and the values he'd tried to instill in me. I want to be a better father than I was before this started. Emma deserves that. She deserves to have her father back, my mother agreed. And Marcus, I'd like to be part of her life too. If you'll let me. I looked at this woman who had sacrificed so much for her country, who had made impossible choices to protect people she'd never meet. She was my mother, but she was also a soldier who understood duty and sacrifice in ways most people never would. Emma should know her grandmother, I said finally. And she should know the truth about her grandfather when she's old enough to understand it. Thank you, she whispered, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw my mother's composure finally crack. Outside the window, Sacramento went about its normal business, unaware that a complex intelligence operation had just concluded in their city. Soon, I would see my daughter again, and we could begin rebuilding our lives. But first, there was one more conversation I needed to have. The conversation I needed to have was with Rebecca, and it happened 30 minutes before Emma arrived at the FBI office. She sat across from me in a different conference room, her eyes red from crying, still processing the revelation that she'd been married to a man who didn't exist. Marcus, I don't know how to apologize for what I've done to you, she began, her voice barely steady. I believed every lie he told me. I turned our daughter against you because I thought you were dangerous. Rebecca, you were protecting Emma the only way you knew how, I said, meaning every word. David is a professional manipulator. He spent months studying our family, learning exactly what to say to make you trust him. But I should have known something was wrong. The way he always steered conversations away from his past. How he never wanted to meet your mother, or any of your military friends. I was so desperate for stability after our divorce, that I ignored the red flags. I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. What happened between us in our marriage? That was real. The problems we had, the reasons we divorced, those weren't David's manipulation. But the fear you developed about my military service, the concern that I might be dangerous to Emma, that was all him. How can you be so understanding about this? I kept your daughter away from you for months based on lies. Because I've learned something about forgiveness from all this, I said, thinking about my conversation with my mother. We all make choices based on the information we have. You made choices to protect Emma. I can't fault you for that, even if the information was wrong. Rebecca wiped her eyes with a tissue. The FBI agents told me that David's real name was David Hendricks, and that he was some kind of weapons dealer. They said I can't discuss the details, but Marcus, what kind of man was I married to? I chose my words carefully, staying within the bounds of what I was allowed to share. He was someone who made a career out of lying and manipulating people. You weren't his first victim, and if we hadn't stopped him, you wouldn't have been his last. Were you and Emma ever really in danger from him? Emma was never in physical danger, I said truthfully, but David was using both of you as weapons against me. He wanted something from me, and when I wouldn't cooperate, he decided to destroy my life instead. What did he want? Information about military operations I was involved in overseas. Information that could have gotten other soldiers killed. Rebecca's face went pale. So this whole thing, our custody battle, the psychological evaluations, everything, it was all about getting you to betray your country? That was part of it. But it was also personal for David. He had reasons to hate me that go back to my service overseas. I feel like such a fool, she said, burying her face in her hands. 3 years of marriage to a man who was using me the entire time. You're not a fool. You're a good mother who got caught in the middle of something you couldn't have understood. And Rebecca, there's something else you need to know. She looked up, fear flickering in her eyes. What? David's arrest and everything that happened today. It's going to attract media attention. The FBI is working to keep the details classified, but there might be reporters asking questions. What am I supposed to tell them? The truth, as far as you know it. You married a man who turned out to be a criminal using a false identity. You had no knowledge of his activities. You were as much a victim as anyone else. What about Emma? How do I explain this to her? The FBI has arranged for a family counselor to help with that conversation. But Rebecca, the most important thing is that we present a united front. Emma needs to see that her parents are working together for her well-being. You're willing to do that? After everything I put you through? Emma didn't ask for any of this. She's the innocent party here, and she needs both of her parents to help her process what's happened. A knock on the door interrupted us. Agent Delgado, who I now knew was actually a naval intelligence officer, entered with a woman in her 40s, wearing a professional suit. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Hartwell, this is Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a child psychologist who specializes in helping families affected by criminal investigations. She's here to help prepare you for Emma's arrival. Dr. Warren sat down with us and explained how to talk to Emma about complex adult situations in ways she could understand. The key is honesty, without overwhelming detail, she said. Emma needs to know that the man she knew as Donald was not who he pretended to be, but she doesn't need to understand the specifics of his crimes. How do we explain why Daddy couldn't visit for so long? Rebecca asked. We tell her that some bad people told lies about Daddy to try to keep him away, but the truth came out and now everything is back to normal, Dr. Warren suggested. Will she blame herself? I asked. Kids sometimes think adult problems are their fault. It's possible, but that's why we're going to have several sessions together as a family. Emma needs to hear from both of you that she did nothing wrong and that she's safe now. Quote, 20 minutes later, Rebecca and I stood together in the lobby of the FBI building, waiting for Emma to arrive. It felt surreal. 6 hours ago, we'd been adversaries in a custody battle, and now we were united in protecting our daughter from the truth about the man she'd called stepfather for 3 years. Marcus, Rebecca said quietly, what happens now? Between us, I mean. We figure out how to be better co-parents than we were before, I said. We learn to communicate without lawyers as intermediaries. We put Emma's needs first. I'd like that, she said. And Marcus? I know this sounds strange, but I think we might actually be better parents now than we were when we were married. How do you figure that? Because we've both learned what really matters. I've learned not to let fear drive my decisions about Emma's safety. And you. I've learned that being a good father means more than just providing and protecting. It means being present, being honest, and being willing to fight for what matters. Through the glass doors, I saw my mother's car pulling up. Emma was in the back seat, looking confused but unharmed. When she saw me through the window, her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that made all the pain of the last few months worth it. Daddy, she shouted as soon as the doors opened, running across the lobby and launching herself into my arms. Hey, baby girl, I whispered, holding her tight. I missed you so much. Mommy said Donald had to go away because he was lying about important things, Emma said, her 8-year-old understanding of the situation both heartbreaking and perfect. Are you in trouble too? No, sweetheart, I'm not in trouble. The people who were making it hard for us to spend time together figured out they were wrong. So you can come to my soccer games again? I wouldn't miss them for the world. Rebecca joined us, and for the first time in years, we stood together as a family unit. Not a romantic unit. That ship had sailed long ago, but a family united in protecting and loving our daughter. My mother approached carefully, hanging back until Emma noticed her. Emma, I said, I'd like you to meet someone very special. This is your grandmother, Sarah. Emma studied my mother with the intense curiosity of a child. Daddy's mommy? That's right, my mother said, kneeling down to Emma's level. I've been wanting to meet you for a very long time. Why haven't I seen you before? Quote, because sometimes grown-ups have to work very far away, and it makes it hard to visit, but I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. Over the next hour, we sat in a family conference room with Dr. Warren, slowly helping Emma understand that the life she'd known for the past 3 years was built on lies, but that the love her parents had for her was completely real. She took it remarkably well, with the resilience that children often show in the face of adult chaos. So Donald was like a bad guy in a movie? She asked at one point. Sort of, Rebecca said carefully. He was pretending to be someone he wasn't, and that hurt a lot of people. But he never hurt me. No, baby, I said firmly. He never hurt you, and he never will. He's going to be in jail for a very long time. As we prepared to leave the FBI building, Agent Delgado pulled me aside one last time. Marcus, there's something else you should know. David's arrest has uncovered intelligence about other criminal networks. You might be contacted by federal prosecutors to testify in related cases. More court appearances? Possibly. But these would be federal criminal trials, not family court. You'd be testifying as a witness to help convict people who put American soldiers at risk. Will it be dangerous? We don't believe so. David's network was the primary threat, and that's been neutralized. But we'll provide security if needed. I nodded, understanding that my involvement in this case might not be completely over, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. Walking out of the FBI building with Emma's hand in mine and Rebecca walking beside us, I realized that the family court attack had actually given me something I'd lost years ago, a real relationship with my daughter and a functional co-parenting relationship with Rebecca. The price had been enormous, but the outcome was worth it. Daddy, Emma said as we reached the parking lot, can we go get ice cream? I want to tell you about everything that happened while you were away. We can do whatever you want, baby girl, I said, meaning every word. We have all the time in the world. 6 months later, Emma scored her first goal in soccer, and both her parents were there to cheer her on. Rebecca had started dating again, carefully this time, with extensive background checks, and I'd built my security business into a thriving company. My mother visited every few weeks, slowly building a relationship with her granddaughter and helping Emma understand her grandfather's legacy of service. David Hendricks was convicted on 18 federal charges and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The weapons trafficking network he'd built was completely dismantled, and the intelligence gained from his capture prevented multiple terrorist attacks. Sometimes justice takes longer than we'd like. Sometimes it requires sacrifice and pain and loss. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, it also brings families back together and reminds us what we're really fighting for. In the end, the family court attack didn't destroy my life. It saved it. And for that, I'll always be grateful to the stepfather who raised me to understand that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. 18 months after that day in family court, I stood in the witness box of a federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., my hand raised as I swore to tell the truth about David Hendricks and his criminal network. The prosecution had called me as their star witness in what the media was calling the largest weapons trafficking case in a decade. The defendant sitting at the defense table wasn't David. He'd already been convicted and sentenced. This was Viktor Kozlov, a former Russian intelligence officer who had been David's primary contact for selling American weapons to foreign buyers. Kozlov had been extradited from Montenegro after a 2-year international manhunt, and the evidence against him included recorded conversations where David discussed specific details about weapons shipments I had helped intercept. Sergeant Chen, the prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Rodriguez, began, "Can you tell the court about your first encounter with the defendant's weapons network in Afghanistan?" "It was March 2020, I replied, my voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. My unit was investigating reports that weapons designated for Afghan National Army forces were ending up in Taliban hands. We tracked serial numbers from captured weapons back to specific shipments." "What did your investigation reveal?" "That someone with access to U.S. military supply chains was systematically diverting weapons. Not random theft, but organized trafficking with specific buyers already arranged." As I testified about the technical details of the investigation, I caught sight of Emma in the gallery. She was now 10 years old, sitting between Rebecca and my mother, wearing her school uniform because we'd picked her up directly from her private academy. I'd initially resisted bringing her to the trial, but Dr. Warren had suggested it might help her understand why her father's work was important. "Sergeant Chen," Rodriguez continued, "during your investigation, did you encounter evidence of American personnel involved in this trafficking?" "Yes, ma'am. We found communications equipment that had been modified with encryption software only available to military intelligence personnel. The sophistication of the operation suggested inside knowledge of our security protocols. Kozlov's defense attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Patrick Sullivan, rose for cross-examination. Sergeant Chen, isn't it true that you were suffering from combat-related stress during the time period you're testifying about? I was dealing with the normal pressures of combat deployment, yes. Normal pressures that included alcohol abuse and incidents of insubordination. Rodriguez objected before I could answer, but Sullivan's strategy was clear. Attack my credibility by bringing up my personal struggles. It was the same tactic that had been used against me in family court, but this time, I was prepared. Your Honor, I said, addressing the judge directly, I'd like to answer the question. Judge Patricia Blackwood nodded. Go ahead, Sergeant. Yes, I struggled with alcohol after my deployment. Yes, I had disagreements with superior officers about operational tactics. But none of that changes the physical evidence we collected, or the accuracy of my reports. The weapons serial numbers don't lie, and the communications equipment we seized speaks for itself. Sullivan tried a different approach. Sergeant Chen, you've testified that you couldn't identify the American personnel involved in this trafficking operation at the time. How convenient that you've now identified them after your own legal troubles were resolved. I identified David Hendricks based on evidence uncovered during the FBI's investigation into his activities in California, I replied. Evidence that corroborated what we'd found in Afghanistan but couldn't interpret at the time. And this David Hendricks just happened to be the man who married your ex-wife? David Hendricks targeted my family specifically because of the investigation I'd conducted. He was trying to discredit me as a witness before these prosecutions began. The courtroom murmured at this revelation. While the intelligence aspects of David's operation remained classified, the basic facts of his identity theft and targeting of my family were part of the public record. After 3 hours of testimony, I was finally dismissed. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure that had been missing even after David's conviction. This trial represented the final chapter in a conspiracy that had killed my stepfather and nearly destroyed my family. Emma ran up to me on the courthouse steps. Daddy, did you help catch all the bad guys? I helped catch some of them, sweetheart. Other people caught the rest. Is it over now? Yes, baby girl. It's over. That evening, we had dinner at my mother's house in Arlington, a tradition we'd established over the past year. Rebecca joined us, along with her new boyfriend, Michael Torres, a high school teacher who had passed my mother's extensive background screening with flying colors. So what happens now? Rebecca asked as we sat around the dinner table. Are there more trials? This was the last one, I said. Kozlov was the highest-ranking foreign contact in David's network. With his conviction, the prosecution has achieved everything they were aiming for. 47 people convicted across 12 countries, my mother added, bouncing Emma on her knee. Your father's testimony was crucial in several of those convictions. Emma looked up at me with pride. Daddy's a hero, right, Grandma Sarah? He's certainly my hero, my mother said, and I saw tears in her eyes. Later that night, after Rebecca had taken Emma home and Michael had left for his own apartment, my mother and I sat on her back porch with glasses of wine, watching the Washington monuments lit up in the distance. Robert would be proud of how this all turned out, she said quietly. I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if he'd approve of the choices I made. What do you mean? Working with the intelligence community, letting Emma get caught up in an operation, putting my family through all that trauma. Dad always said the mission comes first, but family matters too, she finished. Marcus, your stepfather's greatest regret was that his service kept him away from you and your sister so much when you were growing up. He wouldn't want you to sacrifice your relationship with Emma for any mission. Quote, even if that mission helped prevent terrorist attacks? Even then, the point of protecting America is to preserve the freedom to live normal lives, to raise families, to be happy. If we sacrifice those things in the name of security, we've already lost. I thought about that as I drove home to my apartment in Sacramento. Over the past 18 months, I'd built something I'd never had before, a truly balanced life. My security consulting business was thriving, with contracts from corporations who valued my unique expertise. I had Emma every other week, and she'd started calling my apartment home, just as naturally as she called Rebecca's house home. Most importantly, I'd learned to separate Marcus the soldier from Marcus the father. The skills that made me effective in combat and intelligence operations weren't necessarily the skills that made me a good parent. Emma needed me to be present, patient, and emotionally available, qualities that required conscious effort after years of military conditioning. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected phone call from Colonel Garrison. "Marcus, how would you feel about teaching?" "Teaching what?" "The Defense Intelligence Agency is starting a new program to train analysts in recognizing weapons trafficking patterns. Your experience with both the operational and investigative sides makes you uniquely qualified." "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a chance to help prevent other families from going through what yours did. The training program would be based in Virginia, close to your mother. Emma would have access to excellent schools, and the work would involve minimal travel." I considered the offer carefully. Would I be able to maintain my relationship with Emma? Full custody schedule, no deployments. Absolutely. This is a teaching position, not operational work. You'd be helping the next generation of analysts identify threats before they become crises. 3 months later, Emma and I moved to a house in Falls Church, Virginia, 20 minutes from my mother's place and 30 minutes from the DIA facility where I now worked. Rebecca had initially opposed the move, but when she saw the quality of schools and the stability of my new position, she agreed it was best for Emma. On Emma's 11th birthday, she asked me a question that caught me completely off guard. "Daddy, are you going to get married again?" Quote, "We were sitting in our backyard, having just finished her birthday cake, surrounded by friends from her new school and soccer team. "I don't know, sweetheart. Why do you ask?" "Because I think you should. You're happy here, but you get lonely sometimes, I can tell." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. "If I did meet someone I wanted to marry, how would you feel about that?" "I'd want to make sure she's nice to you," Emma said seriously, "and that she doesn't lie about important things like Donald did to Mommy." "Those are very good criteria," I agreed. "And Daddy? I think Grandma Sarah gets lonely too. Maybe she should find someone nice." I laughed, imagining my mother's reaction to dating advice from her 11-year-old granddaughter. I'll mention that to her. As Emma's friends played in the yard and the adults supervised from the deck, I reflected on how different my life was from what I'd imagined 3 years ago. The family court attack had stripped away everything I thought I knew about security, justice, and family. But from that destruction, something better had emerged. I was no longer the rigid military man who confused discipline with love, or the bitter divorced father who saw custody visits as obligation rather than privilege. I'd become someone who understood that the most important battles aren't fought on foreign soil, but in living rooms and courtrooms and soccer fields, fighting for the right to be present in the lives of people who matter. The weapons trafficking network that killed my stepfather was destroyed. David Hendricks would never hurt another family. Viktor Kozlov and 46 other criminals were in prison. And Emma was growing up safe, confident, and loved by parents who had learned to put her needs ahead of their own grievances. Sometimes justice looks different than we expect. Sometimes it requires losing everything to discover what actually matters. And sometimes, if we're very fortunate, it gives us the chance to build something better from the ruins. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed in our new house, she looked up at me with her mother's eyes and her grandfather's determination. "Daddy, will you tell me about Grandpa Robert again? Which story do you want to hear?" "The one about how he taught you to be brave." So I told her about the man who'd raised me to understand honor, duty, and sacrifice, knowing that someday she might need those same lessons. But I also told her about love, forgiveness, and the courage it takes to rebuild when everything falls apart. Because that's what heroes really do. They don't just fight the monsters. They teach the next generation how to build a world where there are fewer monsters to fight. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.